Tennessee Life is sponsored by
Mid-South Sewing and Fabric has what you need for your creative adventure. If it's sewing, embroidery, or vinyl projects you need for a home business, Etsy, Pinterest, and your family, we have it. Mid-South Sewing sells Brothers Sewing and Embroidery machines and the latest scan and cut crafting machine. Mid-South Sewing and Fabric in the Gallery Shopping Center.
Tennessee Life is also brought to you by The Flower Pot. For over 100 years, offering flowers and same-day delivery with 2 convenient Knoxville locations. KnoxvilleFlowerPot.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Coming up on this edition of Tennessee Life, we show our volunteer state pride through painting, mapping, and building landmarks out of Lego blocks. We start in Sarah Pollock's studio, where this newcomer is dedicated to capturing the beauty that is uniquely Tennessee.
So getting out and getting acquainted with a place is really essential to my process and identity as an artist. I really like to celebrate the beauty that's around us every day. And as a newcomer, I like to think that I can bring fresh vision to that.
David Harmon says if you really want to become familiar with a new city, get off the beaten path. That's the process this East Tennessean uses to create his handmade, screen-printed neighborhood maps.
Really, when you think of a specific neighborhood, you're not thinking about the streets, you're thinking about the people in those neighborhoods or the connections you've made or the memories you've had there. And I think to me that's the beauty of really any map, is it sort of lets you hold all of those memories and all of those experiences in one kind of visual product.
From buildings and bridges to famous landmarks, these Knoxville model makers are members of an adult Lego club. The replicas they build are full of teamwork, engineering, and architecture, just like the real thing.
So my design of the Henley Street Bridge is based on a little bit of both the original structure and the new. As I was researching it, TDOT was actually gracious enough to provide plans for the original. So I had the original blueprints to work with, but I also had photos that I'd been taking of the resurfaced bridge. We turned it into a club project just because it's such a massive undertaking. There's over 70,000 parts in the bridge itself.
Those stories next on Tennessee Life.
Thanks for joining us for this edition of Tennessee Life. I'm Vicki Lawson. An artist who now calls Tennessee home decided the best way to get to know her new state was to paint it. No matter where Sarah Pollock sets up her easel, she is finding beauty in the everyday surroundings of the volunteer state.
I'm Sarah Pollock, and I'm a professional painter. I specialize in landscapes and cityscapes, so a contrast between urban and rural subjects. I've been painting for over 15 years. I began in the medium of pastel, and more recently, in the past 5 years, transitioned into oil painting. But the one consistent thread across those 2 different media is I've always specialized in those 2 subjects. I appreciate the variety and the counterpoint. You'll encounter stories and colors and cityscapes that you may not find out in nature, but at the same time, there's no greater opportunity, like on a beautiful day, to go outside and work in the field in an outdoor office, and so I enjoy both subjects. So getting out and getting acquainted with a place is really essential to my process and identity as an artist. I really like to celebrate the beauty that's around us every day. And as a newcomer, I like to think that I can bring fresh vision to that. Sometimes when we've called a place a home for a long time, maybe we lose touch with some of the things that are really beautiful about it. And when I come in and I'm brand new to a place, it's just really important to gain an understanding of the history, some of the stories behind a place. I really enjoy that as part of my process. Because I enjoy cityscapes, I was very enamored of Knoxville itself. I like the industrial history as well as even the more recent history through the Civil War. I was very intrigued by that and just the people and the stories behind the city. And then, of course, we ventured up to the Smoky Mountains. Had to go see that and start to learn some of the intricacies of the paths and some of the more hidden aspects of the park. And so I really enjoyed that contrast again between the urban and the natural. When I'm out in the field, I have to make kind of quick, snap decisions in response to the light, and I have a very small block of time in which to work. But I really love to come back and take those ideas and sort of mull them over a bit more and then blow them up into something bigger in my studio. Before I began working full-time as a painter, I worked for Walt Disney Feature Animation. I was a color stylist for them in their Orlando, Florida studio. And there, my responsibility was to set the color and final appearance of scenes before they went to film. The training I received there was excellent, and I now use that to this day in my own artwork. This is a result of a trip up to the Smoky Mountains, one of my first visits up to the park. So it was a beautiful summer day, starting to transition into fall just a little bit, so those first hints of color. This was painted on location, and as I like to say, in my outdoor office, right along the Middle Prong River. Really, there's a great sensibility of light there that's so different from where I came from, and I'm really enjoying that aspect of living here. In contrast to some of the landscape work that I do, this is a piece, this is along Magnolia Avenue here in Knoxville, and it's called Free Service, and it's all about the vivid colors and graphical elements on that particular summer day in downtown Knoxville. I was just very drawn to the light and the beautiful colors throughout. So I actually was taking a bicycle to be serviced, and I saw that, and again, it was all about the light and shadow, just that moment. Another piece that celebrates downtown Knoxville is right here. This is called Kingston Twilight, and this is right along Kingston Pike near our home. And again, it kind of exemplifies that importance of proper timing. I just happened to catch a beautiful sunset that night, and when you have the right lights, like even something that you pass by every day can become elevated into a wonderful subject. One of them is, it's an interesting little piece. It's called Blue. And it's a painting that I found the inspiration for it while I was downtown in Knoxville, and it's a surface parking lot, but I really liked the graphical and linear elements as well as the old buildings like the orange in contrast to the beautiful blue sky that day and the billowing clouds. I think it kind of exemplifies like the beauty of what's here with our Smoky Mountains and our environment and the clouds, as well as just the history of the city right underneath as a foreground element. There are definitely instances where people relate to paintings even if it isn't necessarily right in their geographical area, and to me that speaks to maybe successfully capturing the mood and the color, like there can be a universality to a subject that is broadly appealing, and that's great. I mean, if that gives people an entry into a work and allows them to access the subject, then all the better. There are definitely instances where, I'll choose, for example, like a rainy day scene, because the reflections on a rainy day, especially in the city, like in the asphalt, I find those captivating. And a lot of times I'll have people say to me, oh, I never thought of like a cold rainy day as something that could be so alluring. But again, that's part of my job as an artist, is to try to show you the world in a new way. As far as a favorite spot, it's interesting. It's very consistent for me, that interest between urban and rural. And so right now I would have to say it's a toss-up between working within the history of Knoxville and kind of its industrial history and looking at the buildings and the architecture and the streets, or totally completely different, going up to, of course, the Smoky Mountains and just retreating for a day and pulling off and doing work right along the streams. I like both of those about equally. They're very different, and it really allows me to get up each day and say, okay, depending upon the lighting or the weather circumstance, I can tailor work and subjects to whatever's happening, and allows me to be more responsive in the work and really make the best of a subject. I travel throughout the eastern United States to exhibit my work at outdoor art shows. These are usually weekend events where you set up and do a display, and I love to think of myself as an ambassador for the area that I'm representing in my artwork, and so it's really fun to have people who have lived in an area for a long time and they come up and see something in a painting that they never recognized before, and I like to share with them any history or backstory behind a subject, why I chose it, and hopefully kind of showcase to them why something's really special. Specifically, I would say a lot of times my landscapes in state parks, people don't realize what's within a day's drive or even just an hour's drive. Being able to celebrate that with them and show them hey, this is right here pretty much in your backyard, and it encourages people to get out and see things for themselves, and I like to be able to do that.
Later on Tennessee Life, Lego blocks for grown-ups. But first, how one map maker works with locals to make sure neighborhoods get their proper place on his hand-printed posters.
Sometimes a map gets you from point A to point B. And sometimes maps help to bring back memories. The man behind Knoxville's native maps says each one of his hand-printed designs starts with known neighborhoods.
I tend to take the long way whenever I go anywhere, and I just love exploring different parts of the city and turning down roads that I've never been down before. And doing that in Knoxville was definitely a big part of making Knoxville feel like home for me. When you've lived there for a while and then you dig in and you realize, wow, there's so much more beneath the surface. It can be as simple as just going out of your way on the way home to drive down a street you've never been down before, or supporting a business that you've never walked into before. A little bit of new perspective can go a really long way. I started Native Maps in 2011, and it was really out of a love for my hometown, Dallas. I grew up in Dallas, and I guess you could say I grew up kind of driving across the city, sort of back and forth, never really digging in and getting to know the city really well. A friend and I sat down one afternoon and started to map out the city almost just for fun. So that was really interesting, just to dig into those kind of nooks and crannies and parts of the city that I had never explored. So we started with our Dallas neighborhood map, and I started selling that at local markets in Dallas and connected with a couple of stores and started selling in those stores. And then we moved to Knoxville, Tennessee for grad school at the University of Tennessee. And about halfway through grad school, we decided to expand the concept and try to take on a handful of other cities and see if we could treat those cities like our hometown, with the same amount of care and connecting with locals in each of those cities to make sure that we got all of the information right. So we started Native Maps halfway through grad school in Knoxville out of the attic of our home. I love screen printing as well because it's a very hands-on process. Each map passes through our hands several times before we roll it up into a tube and ship it out to a customer. It's something where we're actually putting the ink on the screen and pushing the ink through the screen onto the paper. So it's something that is very much a handmade process. And I think there's something about that comes through in the finished product. Really, when you think of a specific neighborhood, you're not thinking about the streets, you're thinking about the people in those neighborhoods or the connections you've made or the memories you've had there. And I think to me that's the beauty of really any map, is it sort of lets you hold all of those memories and all of those experiences in one kind of visual product. Making the Knoxville map was sort of taking that one step further and just really digging in, exploring the whole city, really making sure I knew it well and kind of had a good sense of what I was representing. That was definitely a big part of feeling at home in Knoxville, was making the Knoxville map. I think with any city, and especially with Knoxville, some neighborhoods are really well defined and some neighborhoods aren't, and you really have to kind of dig in and actually drive there yourself and understand where the boundaries are. And even sometimes I've stopped into local establishments and just asked, like, hey, what do you call this neighborhood? Or how do you sort of relate to this area and sort of the areas around it? So that was definitely a part of the making the Knoxville map too, was understanding what are the neighborhoods like 4th and Gill and Old North Knoxville and Old City. Those are really well established, and those should definitely be on the map and be accurate because people will be looking for their city or for their neighborhood. But I really enjoy taking the neighborhoods that aren't as well known, or maybe the people in those neighborhoods are really proud to live there, but they might not be as well known or historically relevant. So I love digging into those neighborhoods as well and just making sure that the whole map each part is equally accurate and well represented. We really wanted to make a map that locals were proud to hang in their home. We love hearing from locals. That's Really my favorite part of making these neighborhood maps is talking to actual locals in each neighborhood. And if somebody speaks up and says, hey, where's my neighborhood? I'll include it almost immediately. So whenever we start a map, we come up with the rough draft ourselves. So that's mostly me looking at all of the resources online, and I'll take all of the different maps that I find and layer them in Illustrator on the computer. And if there's a consensus in any given neighborhood, I'll go with that. If there's not a consensus, then I'll do a little more digging. People can get really up in arms about their neighborhood and just get very opinionated and interested in what should be included and what shouldn't be included. And I really love when that happens, just because even if they're a little feisty about it, it means that they love their city, and that's why they care so much. In Tennessee, we have Nashville, Knoxville, and Memphis, and then we also have a map of Franklin, Tennessee. And as far as other major cities that we have are Manhattan, Brooklyn, Los Angeles, Seattle, Dallas, and probably about 15 other major US cities. I think it's always important to respect the history of a city and to be really inclusive and knowledgeable about each city that you're making. And I think it's also been interesting to realize that no one is perfect, and I'm not going to make a perfect map, and to try to build our business and our process so that that map can always change and adapt and grow. Hopefully it's tuning you into the fact that a city is like a person, and people have many different facets, and it's worth getting to know all of those different sides of a city. What I enjoy most is meeting actual people in the city and in those neighborhoods, and just hearing from them why they loved their city.
Some city landmarks are worth creating in miniature, and you won't believe the detail in these constructed creations by members of the Tennessee Valley Lego Club.
According to LEGO's official guidelines, the word LEGO is an adjective and is to be used to describe LEGO pieces, LEGO sets, or LEGO bricks. It is not a noun, so according to LEGO themselves, LEGO is not a thing, it's a type. I have one room filled to the brim with LEGO and several other rooms that we say we keep the LEGO out of, but it still finds its way there. It migrates from room to room. With LEGO, there's this inherent joy and imagination that comes from taking these pieces that can be literally anything and picturing something in your mind and putting them together and creating this thing. Even if it's a very poorly rendered version of what you had in your mind, you've created this thing that previously you only imagined. It's not a toy that is something, it's a toy that's everything. To this day, I still remember the very first LEGO set I ever built. It was a LEGO space set in, I believe, 1992. It was released. It was the Blacktron Trike. I remember sitting in the kitchen with my dad and mom, and they had gotten it for me. I was maybe 3.5 years old, and I remember my dad helping me find the pieces and putting them together. And it's one of those, I still have it to this day. There are several sets that just spark specific memories, and I have more of a kind of a sentimental attachment to those sets. To this day, my grandmother will remind me about the piece of dragon fire that we lost in the car on the trip from Florida probably about 20 times, and we had to stop the car and halt everything while we dug around trying to find the little piece of fire that had fallen out of the dragon's mouth. I'm Marty Mitchell. I'm with the Tennessee Valley Lego Club. I'm the vice president of the Knoxville chapter. We formed about 3.5 years ago, and the club itself has been around for about 10 years now. Lego is really not just for kids. It's this thing that so many people are introduced to as a child, but you hear story after story of parents going and digging up their old Lego sets, or everyone has a big tub of Lego sitting somewhere in their attic or at a parent's house, and they'll go dig them up and start building these sets with their children or with their nieces, nephews, these young children. And I can't tell you how many members of our club have the same exact story where they had a child, they dug out their old parts and started building and realized this is something I still want to do every day. In August of 2018, we did our second participation with Brick Universe. It's a traveling Lego art expo, and they also bring in local builders to showcase their creations. And shows like that are the high point of the club, personally, for me. It's where we get to bring the best of the best that we've created and show it off not only to other Lego fans, but we get to show it to kids and their parents. And this is where we see people coming in and their faces just light up because they've never seen this many Lego pieces in one place at a time. You just sort of get to interact with people and talk about what you've built and see the smiles that you bring to faces. The highlight of the show as far as local landmarks is the Henley Street Bridge, which Pete Campbell, the club president, designed over the course of years.
My design of the Henley Street Bridge is based on a little bit of both the original structure and the new. As I was researching it, TDOT was actually gracious enough to provide plans. You know, once they find out you're doing this out of Legos, everybody starts to get excited. And so I found a really good resource there at TDOT who was very supportive, supported what we were doing and said, let me provide you with these plans. They provided a historic report that had been done prior to the rebuild of the bridge and offered to provide any other photos that we needed or anything like that. So it was just really well received. And so that made, the planning and the design of the model a whole lot easier. We'll do the paper sketches. We'll get the scale right, and then we'll transition to a computer design. So by the end of it, I've got a full design built up in the computer that can basically serve as more or less an instruction manual, and it also generates a part list. And then I can go order those parts that I don't have, and after 4 or 5 months of that, and I've found everything, which is usually how long it takes, I've still got instructions that I can go follow to, go build this thing long after I've forgotten how it goes together.
The Knoxville chapter of the club came together over several weekends and built, just out of nothing, had this 20-foot bridge rise up out of the Lego pieces, and that was the single biggest local landmark. Everyone who drives by it, people in Knoxville know the Henley Street Bridge. It's just something that if you are in and around downtown, you either drive across it or you walk by it every single day.
It's really neat, especially with something of that scale. One, it's a local landmark, so a lot of people recognize it and you get a lot of good reactions, but the scale of it is such that, that generates its own reaction. There's over 70,000 parts in the bridge itself. We didn't have the lights turned on for a while, and you turn those on and people aren't expecting that, and that's a whole new reaction. So the lighting system that we put into the bridge is based on the actual bridge. The goal was to be able to reproduce anything that the real bridge does. Part of the research for that was I contacted the city engineer that runs that software. He's in charge of the lights for the Henley Street Bridge. So we met one day and he showed me the software they were using, and we kind of talked about the protocol and how it's controlled and all that kind of stuff with the real bridge. Turns out that it's a very common protocol, so if you go to a concert or a theater event, the lighting system, that's running that show, it's kind of an industry standard, and the Henley Street Bridge uses the same industry standard. So the model uses that standard. It's a big enough model and there are enough individual lights on it that you have to have a way to control over 500 separate lights on the model. We built up our own hardware, kind of using that protocol, and it plugs into just an off-the-shelf lighting controller. You could plug it into the same one that runs the Henley Street Bridge and it would run the model. So that was pretty cool. We took it to Chicago for Brick World, which is the largest Lego fan convention in the US, maybe even the world. You've got representatives from Lego there. The owner of Lego has attended in the past. It's a very big convention and kind of the one everybody wants to go to if they've got a chance. And it actually won Best in Show in 2018, and it also won Best Lit Model in 2018, which was just a huge honor. So we were really, really excited, for the model and for everybody in the club that had a part in it for those awards.
You can build anything you want out of Lego, provided you have the patience, the will to make it, and enough pieces.
I think it's just, even though you've got all these wonderful video games and digital distractions nowadays, that you've still got a toy that's true to its roots, that's something, that you can touch and feel and create with. I kind of think that's the magic of the medium.
We hope you've enjoyed the art, insight, and creativity that celebrates the beauty of our state. I'm Vicki Lawson. See you on the next Tennessee Life.
Tennessee Life is sponsored by
Mid-South Sewing and Fabric has what you need for your creative adventure. If it's sewing, embroidery, or vinyl projects you need for a home business, Etsy, Pinterest, and your family, we have it. Mid-South Sewing sells Brothers Sewing and Embroidery machines and the latest scan and cut crafting machine. Mid-South Sewing and Fabric in the Gallery Shopping Center.
Tennessee Life is also brought to you by The Flower Pot. For over 100 years, offering flowers and same-day delivery with 2 convenient Knoxville locations. KnoxvilleFlowerPot.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you. A DVD of this program is available by visiting easttennesseepbs.org.